Imagine this. You step into a room, okay? Paris, 1755. It's lit by candlelight, buzzing, with this intellectual energy. It's a salon. But it's definitely not just a party. The hostess, Marie-Thérèse Geoffrin, she's kind of running the show, guiding the conversation, keeping things polite. And there's this brand new copy of the Encyclopedia just sitting there.
That massive work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But the real heat in the room, it's not the candles, it's the argument. This astonishing idea that everything, the monarchy, the church, the whole social setup should be judged, not by tradition, not by God's will, but purely by, reason.
Reason and evidence.
Reason and evidence, yeah. That scene, it really nails the sheer boldness of the Age of Reason, or the Enlightenment, as we often call it. We're talking roughly 1660 to, say, 1785.
Right.
And it was this huge intellectual cultural shift. It really put reason, empirical testing, actually looking at the evidence in public debate front and center as the way forward.
The only way forward. Well, the primary path, the core way to reform knowledge, politics, society. It wasn't just thinking differently. It was like a blueprint for actually rebuilding things.
It's easy to just picture the powdered wigs, isn't it? And think of it as just old philosophical chats.
Right. A museum piece.
Exactly. But you really have to get the context to feel its power. This wasn't some academic game. It was a direct response to, total chaos across Europe.
Utter chaos. You had a century of incredibly bloody religious wars. The 30 Years' War just devastated Central Europe. Then there was the English Civil War.
People were just exhausted, worn out by these endless fights justified by, competing dogmas, religious dogma, monarchical dogma.
And the Enlightenment solution, at its heart, sounds simple, but it was revolutionary. Let's replace the authority of religion, revelation, tradition with the authority of reason. Things you can actually test and verify.
And politically.
Politically, replace the divine right of kings, this idea that God picked the ruler, with something based on human agreement. That's the social contract idea.
So our mission here in this deep dive is to get past those wigs, past the surface, and really connect that historical moment to how we live now. The political structures, scientific methods, maybe even the digital world.
Absolutely. This era basically gave us the operating system for Western modernity. It's that fundamental.
Okay, let's unpack that. This foundational shift. Before the philosophers could really sell the idea of a rational society governed by, predictable laws.
They needed proof.
Yeah, they needed proof that the universe itself worked that way. Logically, predictably.
Which brings us straight to the groundwork laid before them, especially the scientific revolution. We're talking 16th, 17th centuries here.
Right, people like Galileo, Copernicus.
And crucially, Isaac Newton. Their work, combined with this new focus on the experimental method, actually testing things, it gave people this incredible confidence that nature wasn't just mysterious chaos.
They could investigate it. Systematically.
Exactly. And Newton's Principia Mathematica, published in 1687, well, you could argue it's the single most important intellectual text for the entire Enlightenment.
I think we sometimes forget just how earth-shattering Newton's ideas were psychologically.
Truly.
He showed this universe governed by these elegant mathematical laws. Laws you could figure out, test, using human reason. You didn't need to invoke God stepping in every 5 minutes.
It shifted the whole frame. Instead of asking why things happen, which is often a theological question,
right,
people started asking how they happen. What's the mechanism? It's a much more, mechanical view of the universe.
And the implication is massive. If the cosmos, this vast, complicated thing, is basically a rational machine running on rules,
then why can't human society be the same? Why can't we figure out the rules for politics, for social order, and make it rational, efficient, maybe even fair? That confidence just flowed right into political thinking.
And it wasn't only science, right? There were earlier movements that kind of tilled the soil.
Absolutely. You had Renaissance humanism, which brought back classical learning, focused on human potential rhetoric.
And the Protestant Reformation.
Crucial.
Yeah.
It had already challenged that single monolithic religious authority. It created this cultural appetite for questioning, for individual judgment, for looking closely at texts. So the ground was definitely fertile for reason to really take hold.
Okay, so that brings us to some key moments politically. You mentioned 1660 earlier, the Restoration in England.
Right. After the turmoil of the Civil War, executing a king, There was this deep desire for stability, for order. And you see it reflected in the culture, Neoclassicism, in literature, people like Pope, Dryden, in architecture too. It's all about balance, restraint, looking back to classical models.
A kind of cultural deep breath.
Exactly. But the really big political earthquake, globally speaking, was 1688. The Glorious Revolution in England.
Relatively bloodless, right?
Relatively, yeah. And it resulted in William and Mary accepting the 1689 English Bill of Rights. That effectively cemented constitutional monarchy. Parliament became supreme. It was practical proof that government power could be limited by human laws, not just divine will.
And this is where John Locke comes in, providing the philosophical muscle.
Precisely. His 2 treatises of government from 1690 basically became the intellectual roadmap for modern politics. His core argument, government is legitimate only if it has the consent of the people it governs.
The consent of the governed. Still a radical idea.
Hugely radical. And he argued people have inherent natural rights. He famously listed them as life, liberty, and property.
Life, liberty, and property.
And crucially, if the government violates those rights, if it becomes tyrannical, the citizens have a right to revolt, to overthrow it.
That's an enormous claim, but Locke himself, you mentioned natural rights, consent. How do we square that with his own life? Wasn't he involved in, well, colonialism, even the slave trade?
Yes. That's the fundamental tension. It's the question we have to keep asking about the Enlightenment. Locke provides this incredibly powerful language of liberation, of universal rights accessible to all rational humans.
What?
But in practice, its application was immediately selective. It mainly benefited, let's be frank, white, male property-owning Europeans. He was personally invested in colonial ventures, including the Royal African Company involved in the slave trade.
So the theory says universal. But the reality?
The reality was deeply compromised from the start. It shows this double-edged quality of Enlightenment thought, universal ideals existing right alongside very specific, often self-serving exclusions and economic interests. It's the blueprint for freedom and simultaneously a justification, however implicitly, for exploitation.
That tension does it carry through into what's called the High Enlightenment, say the mid-18th century?
Absolutely. Roughly 1740 to 1775. This is the era dominated by the French philosophers Voltaire, Montesquieu, Diderot, incredible energy, and they built this amazing network for exchanging ideas.
The Republic of Letters.
Exactly, and it wasn't just an idea, it was a real network. Letters, banned books, essays, journals circulating across borders, mostly in French. It deliberately bypassed the state, bypassed the church. A genuine, borderless intellectual community.
And the speed of that exchange you mentioned earlier, it got a massive boost from new social settings, right? If we're looking for a modern parallel, like how ideas spread outside formal channels today.
You have to talk about coffee houses.
The internet of the Enlightenment. Is that fair?
It's a great analogy, actually. Coffee houses popped up in the late 17th century, especially in London, and just exploded. And they were remarkably democratic for the time, not like the universities or royal academies.
Anyone could go in.
Well, any man. For the price of a penny cup of coffee, hence the nickname penny universities, you could walk in, read the latest pamphlets, newspapers, and, crucially, debate. Politics, science, philosophy, trade, everything was on the table.
But it wasn't just a free-for-all shouting match.
No, that's the key. They developed their own internal rules, a kind of social contract within the coffee house. Civility, moderation, using evidence in your arguments, these were valued. It was like a training ground for this new idea of public discourse.
So you earned respect by how well you argued, not who your father was.
Pretty much. Reputation was built on reason and wit, and this power, this ability to shape opinion completely outside of government control, it was noticed. King Charles II actually tried to shut them all down in the 1670s.
What?
He called them seminaries of sedition. He saw them, correctly, as a threat to absolute monarchy, but the ban failed miserably. It showed that once this kind of public conversation starts, once it finds a space, it's incredibly hard to put the genie back in the bottle.
Okay, so we've got these big structural shifts, political changes, new places for debate. But what about the individual? How did the Enlightenment change how people saw themselves, their own minds?
This is where it gets really deep, laying the groundwork for, modern identity. The core shift was seeing the self not as just a fixed piece in some divine hierarchy, but as a reasoning agent.
An active thinker.
Exactly. And Locke, again, provides the famous formulation with tabula rasa, the blank slate.
Meaning you're born with nothing innate, no knowledge, no built-in morality.
That was Locke's argument, yeah. Before him, a lot of philosophy assumed we had innate ideas, maybe placed there by God. Locke said, no, the mind at birth is empty. Everything comes from experience.
Wow, the implications of that are huge. If your mind is blank.
Then who you become, your identity, your moral compass, it's all shaped by your experiences and how you reason about them. It puts a massive emphasis on personal autonomy, on learning, on self-improvement. Virtue isn't inherited, it's built.
That's the seed of modern individualism, isn't it? The idea that everyone, potentially, has the capacity to think for themselves, make moral choices, regardless of their birth station.
Precisely. And it fuels those cognitive habits. We talked about skepticism, empiricism. You're encouraged not to just accept what you're told, whether by the church or the state. You're supposed to test claims, look for evidence, think critically.
That way of thinking. It's fundamental to science, to law.
To investigative journalism, even. It's about demanding proof.
But hang on, if it's all about pure, cold reason, wasn't there a reaction against that? Did people worry it was becoming too robotic?
Absolutely, and that's crucial. The Enlightenment wasn't just one thing. There was this really important countercurrent, especially later in the 18th century, the age of sensibility.
Sensibility, meaning feelings, emotions.
Exactly. Thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and novelists, the sentimental novels were huge then, writers like Samuel Richardson. They pushed back against pure, abstract reason. They emphasized feeling, empathy, or natural human sympathies.
Why? What was the danger they saw in pure reason?
They argued that reason alone, without compassion, could lead to harshness, even cruelty. You need that emotional, empathetic side, what some called the moral sense, to guide your reason towards humane ends.
So sensibility wasn't anti-reason, it was more like a necessary partner, a balance.
A psychological and moral complement, exactly. It suggested we have this innate capacity for kindness, for sympathy that needs nurturing. And this connects to that culture of politeness we mentioned. It wasn't just about good manners. It was seen as a vital social skill to smooth interactions, enable that civil debate in the coffee houses and salons. You needed both reason and politeness.
Okay, so the individuals is changing. How does that scale up to society? This is where the idea of the public sphere comes in.
Yes, and the sociologist Jürgen Habermas gave us the classic analysis of this. He talked about the emergence of the bourgeois public sphere.
Bourgeois. Okay, let's unpack that word. It sounds exclusive.
It definitely implies an element of exclusion, and Habermas was clear about that. Bourgeois signals that this new public sphere, this space for debate outside the state and the court, was mainly populated by, well, the middle classes.
People with some money, some education.
Right. Merchants, professionals, lawyers, educated landowners, people who had the time, the literacy, and the economic independence to participate, to buy the newspapers, the books, the coffee. So while it was independent of the king, it wasn't open to everyone. It was largely male, largely property owning.
So a step towards openness, but not fully democratic yet.
Not by our standards, no, but revolutionary for its time. For the first time, public opinion became a real force, something rulers had to at least consider.
And to be part of this sphere, you needed more than just money or literacy, right? There were new kinds of social skills involved. You mentioned improvement ethics.
Yes, this idea took hold that you had a sort of moral duty to improve yourself. Through reading, through conversation, through refining your manners and your mind, civil discourse, being able to argue reasonably and respectfully, became a key social virtue. Polite sociability wasn't just nice, it was necessary for this new form of civic life.
It sounds like it required a whole new infrastructure to support it.
It did, and you see this massive expansion of institutions. More schools, yes, but also academies focused on specific sciences, lending libraries, public museums starting to appear.
Places where knowledge was shared, debated.
And where the norms of citizenship were starting to shift. It wasn't just about who you were born as, it was increasingly about being literate, having some specialized knowledge, being able to make a reasoned argument. These institutions built the intellectual scaffolding needed for a society run by complex laws and rational administration, not just the whims of the powerful.
All right, let's get concrete. How did these big ideas actually play out? Let's look at some case studies. And you have to start with the encyclopedia, right?
Absolutely. The Encyclopedia, or to give its full title, the Systematic Dictionary of the Sciences, Arts, and Crafts, led by Denis Diderot and Jean-Laurent d'Alembert. This thing was colossal. decades in the making, 28 volumes.
More than just an encyclopedia as we think of it today.
Oh, much more. It was like a physical manifestation of the whole Enlightenment project. Its goal was incredibly ambitious. Gather all human knowledge, reorganize it, and crucially, secularize it. Put it all between covers, from A to Z.
Secularize. Why was that so radical? What did it mean in practice?
Well, think about how knowledge was usually ordered back then. Theology, the study of God, was always at the top. Then maybe abstract philosophy. The encyclopedia threw that out. It used a system based on human reason, often just alphabetical order, or Diderot's own framework derived from Francis Bacon, which put human faculties, memory, reason, imagination at the center.
So it dethroned theology in a way.
In terms of organization, yes. And equally radical was the space it gave to practical skills, craft knowledge.
Like making things, weaving, metalworking.
Exactly. Detailed articles, amazing illustrations of tools and processes for things like mining, glassmaking, agriculture. It treated the knowledge of the artisan, the engineer, with the same intellectual seriousness as the philosopher or the statesman.
That must have shaken things up, giving that kind of dignity to manual work.
It terrified the establishment. By cataloging these practical arts, by aiming to spread this knowledge widely, potentially to anyone who could read it, independent of the church or the guilds, it was seen as dangerously democratic.
So pushback was inevitable.
Oh, huge pushback. The church and the crown were alarmed. There were fierce censorship battles. Diderot was briefly imprisoned. The project was banned multiple times. Often, volumes had to be printed secretly, sometimes outside France, and then smuggled back in.
Wow. That really shows you both how powerful these ideas were felt to be and how fragile this whole public discourse thing actually was.
Precisely. It wasn't an easy victory.
Okay, moving from a massive book project to a more social institution, the salons. You mentioned Marie-Thérèse Geoffrin earlier. These were mainly run by women, right? The salonières.
Yes, women were absolutely central to the salons. Figures like Madame Geoffrin, Madame du Deffand, Julie de Lespinasse. They essentially institutionalized these gatherings. They weren't just passive hostesses.
What did they actually do?
They curated the guest list, mixing aristocrats, writers, artists, visiting diplomats, financiers. They enforced the rules of polite, witty, intellectual conversation. They steered the discussions, often setting the topics. Geoffrin, for example, financially supported some of the philosophes, like Diderot, protected others. They were crucial nodes in that Republic of Letters network. Gatekeepers, in a way.
So this gave women, particularly elite women, a lot of influence.
Yeah.
Cultural power.
Immense cultural influence. The power to make introductions, to promote certain ideas or artists, to shape taste and opinion. But here's the crucial tension, the question historians still debate.
Did it actually democratize things? Or just change how the elite socialized?
Exactly. While salons gave these women significant informal power, real formal political power, voting, holding office, making laws remained almost exclusively male. The salons created this parallel world of female influence, but it didn't translate into direct political rights.
So intellectual inclusion up to a point, but not political equality.
That seems to be the consensus, a step, but a limited one.
Okay, final case study, the ultimate application. When these ideas hit the streets, so to speak, revolutions. Let's start with the American one, 1776.
The American founding is arguably the most direct and perhaps most successful translation of Enlightenment theory into practice. The Declaration of Independence itself is almost a perfect neoclassical artifact.
Neoclassical how? Because of its structure.
Precisely. Remember, neoclassicism valued order, balance, logic, classical forms. The Declaration is structured like a formal proof, almost like something out of Euclid.
Okay, break that down.
It starts with universal, self-evident premises, all men created equal, endowed with unalienable rights, echoing Locke, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
The axiom.
Right. Then it presents the evidence. A long list of specific grievances against King George III, the factual basis for the claim of tyranny.
The data.
Exactly. And then it draws the logical conclusion. Based on these universal principles and this evidence, the colonies have the right, even the duty, to revolt and form a new government. It appeals not to divine revelation, but to the opinions of mankind, using reason as its justification.
It's Locke plus Montesquieu, essentially. Natural rights and the idea of separating powers, which came later in the Constitution.
It's deeply indebted to both, yes. Now, contrast that with the French Revolution starting in 1789, also deeply inspired by the philosophes liberty, equality, fraternity, the rights of man.
But it went differently.
Very differently. It quickly became far more radical, more violent. The French Revolution exposed the dangers, the complexities, the sheer difficulty of applying these abstract, rational ideals to the messy reality of deep-seated social inequalities and desperate political circumstances.
The Reign of Terror.
The Reign of Terror showed how that same appeal to radical reason, if it wasn't tempered by maybe humility or strong procedures or respect for tradition, could turn monstrous. It could justify purging enemies, suppressing dissent, all in the name of a supposedly rational, virtuous republic. It highlighted the potential for reason to become its own form of tyranny.
Okay, so the story we often get, especially maybe in school, is this smooth upward curve. Enlightenment equals progress. But this section is about digging into the problems, the contradictions. Some myth-busting is needed.
Definitely. Myth number 1, that the Enlightenment was all secular, all progressive, all driven by calm, detached reason. The reality was much messier. It was diverse, often conservative in how things played out, and full of self-critique.
Self-critique, like how?
Well, think about the explosion of satire in this era. Jonathan Swift, Alexander Pope, Gulliver's Travels, for instance. It wasn't all serious treatises. They used brilliant wit and biting mockery to attack the arrogance, the pretensions, the sometimes absurd extremes of the new scientific mindset and the rising bourgeois society. They saw the potential for reason to make people ridiculous or even dangerous.
That's a good point. It wasn't all earnest. And what about faith? Was it really just a wholesale rejection of religion?
Not at all. That's another oversimplification. Many of the absolute key figures, Locke, Newton you mentioned, even Voltaire for much of his life, were deeply religious. They often saw their work as revealing God's rational order in the universe.
So how did they square reason with faith?
A common path was deism. This needs a clear definition because it gets misused.
Okay, but what is deism exactly?
Deists believed in a god, a creator, but they saw God as a kind of divine clockmaker. He created the universe, set it up with perfect, rational, natural laws humans could discover through reason, and then essentially step back. Let the clockwork run.
So no miracles, no divine intervention in daily life, no trusting scripture literally.
Exactly. They rejected revelation, miracles, scriptural inerrancy. And this had a huge political implication. If God isn't constantly intervening, then rulers can't claim some special divine sanction for their actions. It undermines that whole divine right of kings idea by grounding religion itself in reason.
Okay, so it was a way to make religion compatible with reason and also politically useful for limiting arbitrary power. But that still doesn't get us away from the really dark side, the exclusions.
No, it doesn't. And we have to confront this directly. The very tools the Enlightenment championed, classification, ordering knowledge, applying universal principles, these same tools were used to justify exclusion and domination.
How so?
Well, we already touched on the public sphere being bourgeois and male. Women, the poor, obviously enslaved people, and colonized populations were largely left outside that universal reason. The universal claims often masked a very specific European male property owner perspective.
And this links directly to colonialism and the rise of scientific racism.
Tragically, yes. That same drive to categorize and order the natural world, which was essential for the encyclopedia and for Newtonian science, got turned onto human beings.
Creating hierarchies.
Creating rigid racial hierarchies. Enlightenment thinkers started creating these detailed anthropological classifications, ranking different peoples based on supposedly rational, observable traits. But these rankings inevitably placed Europeans at the top. It provided a pseudo-scientific veneer, a justification for colonialism and the slave trade. We're bringing reason and civilization to these less rational people. It was enlightened paternalism as a mask for exploitation.
Which brings us to a really crucial and chilling concept, instrumental rationality. This seems like a major critique that came later, looking back at the Enlightenment legacy.
It is. Instrumental rationality is basically thinking focused purely on efficiency. How do we find the most effective, the most rational means to achieve a specific end without asking too many hard questions about the morality or the value of the end itself?
So it's about the how, not the why or the should we?
Precisely. The Enlightenment perfected techniques for efficient classification, for administration, for technological control. The danger, as later critics like those from the Frankfurt School pointed out, is when you detach those powerful means from humane ends.
What happens then?
Well, if your goal is simply, say, efficient economic production or managing a population, then treating people as data points, as statistics, as categories to be managed, That becomes the rational, efficient thing to do. It allows you to rationalize actions that might be deeply unjust or dehumanizing because they work according to the system's logic.
Bureaucracy, technological control.
Exactly. Adorno and Horkheimer, key figures in the Frankfurt School, argued that this instrumental reason, pushed to its extreme, leads to new, highly efficient forms of domination, reducing human complexity to manageable data. It's a ghost of the Enlightenment's love of order, but turned into a potential nightmare.
So these critiques are fundamental. Post-colonial scholars point out the Eurocentrism hidden in the universal claims,
arguing that Enlightenment ideas were often complicit in imperialism, forcing non-Western cultures into grappling with imposed models of modernity.
And Habermas himself, who analyzed the birth of the public sphere, he worried about its decline, right?
Yes, he warned that the original bourgeois public sphere, based on reasoned debate, eventually got swamped by commercial interests and mass media, creating what he called manufactured publicity, more about manipulating emotions through advertising and PR than genuine citizen debate.
Which sounds disturbingly familiar in our digital age.
It resonates powerfully. The fragmentation of media, the filter bubbles, the rise of disinformation, it all challenges that Enlightenment ideal of a shared public space for rational discussion. But despite all these crucial criticisms, these deep shadows, we can't escape the fact that the Age of Reason laid the foundations. It really did provide the core operating system for modern liberal democracy.
You really can't deny it. You just look around at the structures we take for granted, mostly constitutional government.
Montesquieu's idea of separating powers: executive, legislative, judicial, checks and balances.
Secular legal systems, the whole language of human rights.
It all flows directly out of this period. The American Declaration and Constitution aren't just historical documents. They're working blueprints built with Enlightenment tools. They tried to bake things like religious tolerance and natural rights right into the political code.
And even today, when you listen to political arguments,
you hear the echoes constantly. Appeals to reason, the facts, expert opinion on one side,
versus appeals to tradition or faith or common sense or just raw emotion on the other.
It's the same fundamental tension playing out. And think about the whole battle against fake news or disinformation today. That urge to demand evidence, to verify sources, to rely on facts. That's a purely Enlightenment impulse pushing back against what feels like a rising tide of irrationality.
So if we try to draw up a final balance sheet, it's complicated. Strengths and weaknesses sitting right next to each other.
The strengths are undeniable. It gave us powerful intellectual tools for questioning authority, for demanding evidence skepticism, the scientific method. And it spurred institutions, public education, civic groups that aimed, at least in theory, for wider participation.
But the weaknesses are just as profound. That overconfidence in reason sometimes, the blindness to its own exclusions.
The way it benefited primarily a white, male, European elite. And that dark potential of instrumental reason using rationality itself to justify domination, whether through scientific racism or efficient dehumanizing bureaucracies.
We should also remember it wasn't just one monolithic thing across Europe, right? It looked different in different places.
Absolutely. The French Enlightenment, as we saw, tended to be more radical, often sharply anti-clerical, focused on abstract rights, contributing maybe to the French Revolution's explosive nature.
Whereas the Scottish Enlightenment,
thinkers like Adam Smith, David Hume, much more focused on practical application, on economics, on moral psychology, that idea of sensibility we discussed. How do actual human sentiments shape society and markets? It had a huge influence on the sort of commercial pragmatic spirit in America.
And Germany.
The German Aufklärung came a bit later, was perhaps more philosophical, less revolutionary. Kant is the towering figure, focused on the nature of reason itself, its limits, its capabilities, more about inner intellectual freedom than immediate political upheaval.
And globally. The ideas spread, but not evenly.
No. In the Americas, they fueled independence movements. But elsewhere, in much of Asia and Africa, Enlightenment ideas often arrived with colonialism imposed alongside resource extraction. This forced colonized cultures into complex negotiations, creating hybrid modernities that scholars are still untangling today. The ideas were never just neutral concepts. They landed in specific power dynamics.
So maybe the best way to think about the Age of Reason isn't as some golden age we should return to, but more like Delbert, like a laboratory.
That's a good way to put it. A laboratory that produced this incredibly powerful but double-edged toolkit. Reason, empiricism, public debate. The legacy isn't the tools themselves, maybe, but the ongoing struggle over how we use them, fairly, universally, or just for narrow advantage, which leaves us right here, grappling with the legacy. The central claim of the Enlightenment, it still feels provocative today, doesn't it? That ordinary people using their reason, debating in public, can actually improve their society, improve their lives.
It's a powerful idea. But fulfilling it, especially given the history of exclusion we've talked about, that's the unfinished part. And maybe the best guidepost comes from Immanuel Kant, late in the era. He kind of summed up the whole spirit in 2 Latin words.
Sapere aude.
Which means...
Dare to know.
Dare to know.
Have the courage, Kant said, to use your own understanding. Don't just rely on authorities. Think for yourself. That's the core Enlightenment challenge.
But maybe today, daring to know isn't enough, given what we know now about the downsides.
Exactly. The challenge for us inheriting this legacy is to pair that courage, the courage to reason, to question, to demand evidence with humility.
Humility about what?
Humility about the historical blind spots, the exclusions that were baked in. Attentiveness to how even rational systems can cause harm, that instrumental reason problem. And a real commitment to making public debate genuinely fair, genuinely pluralistic, listening to voices that were shut out before.
So dare to know, but know with a conscience. Know with an awareness of history and power.
That's the difficult, ongoing work, isn't it? That's the project the Age of Reason handed down to us. It's not finished. It's ours to continue, critically and carefully.